when you're applying to your next place, why is the landlord doing all this? Well, 20% plus rent payments are late. And like, whoa, that's 1 out of 5 renters. Hello, everybody. We're going to talk today about an article that the Wall Street Journal, which I liked the Wall Street Journal in general, which is why this is like a surprising article. Do you have the headline handy right now?
I do.
The headline reads,
Landlords have a new hardball tactic, tanking your credit score.
Gosh, your credit score. As though the Wall Street Journal readers does not include landlords, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there's no landlords.
When you don't get paid 2-3 months of rent at the term end of a lease, and they don't pay before moving out, and they don't pay after moving out, and they just don't pay, what are you supposed to do? Well, you either go to small claims court, which those orders aren't always enforced,
Yep.
or you give it to a collections agent to, this is not my problem anymore. And what do? They report it, right? That's like, how long has this been going on? This is a practice decades old, right?
Yeah, definitely not new. And the article itself talks about how when tenants fail to pay rent, landlords will at times be forced to report them to collection agencies, which then hurts their credit, right?
Right.
And the article did do a good job at finding a couple of very specific stories that pulled at our heartstrings, and also, I would say, painted landlords in general pretty negatively, as if they're finding any reason to ruin the credit score of their tenants, which certainly isn't the case when we get a chance to interact with our TurboTenant landlords.
Most landlords, any landlord.
Yeah.
95%, 99%.
They're kind of walking through this process as if owing debt never results on a knock for your credit score, unless, of course, it's some terrible landlord.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that is the only situation. And what's funny is they even provided a great graph in the article itself that actually showed consumers' complaints about debt collection, right? And the top thing is what you'd expect. It's credit cards. You got telecommunications companies, right? So Comcast, your internet provider, and then you have medical, right? These are the doctors. These are the that you go to, right? Those hospital visits that are sending people to debt collectors. And then you actually have rental, but then you also, on this list, you have auto, you have payday loans, you have mortgages, you have private student loans, and then you even have federal student loans, right? They do the same thing. So our federal government, which is doing the same thing on student loans. And so, it is wildly clickbaity, I think, to call this out as both new as well as something that landlords do. And we actually experience landlords doing a whole lot of tactics to avoid this.
Yeah, way before it.
Cash for keys is when a landlord has reached a point where they would like to evict a tenant, move a tenant out outside the lease. And so they actually make an offer to pay that tenant or forgive debts in some cases, so that the tenant would hand over the keys and basically surrender the property. It's a really popular tactic when the amount owed is less than the cost of going through eviction court.
Yep. Or
if you're in a location like some of my rental properties in New York, where eviction court just takes months and months to go through, right? And we just went through during COVID, right? There's all these eviction moratoriums, and so you didn't even have the option to go through that process, right, to the courts. And so, cash for keys. We had one property where we actually paid a tenant who already owed thousands in back rent. We paid them $3,000 and helped them move. Literally showed up to the property, helped them move their stuff out, right, in a cash for keys situation, because we'd done the calculation and we knew in New York State we were 8 to 12 months out from any sort of eviction proceeding, and the amount of rent we were going to lose during that time just wasn't worth it, right?
Yeah.
And so, there's different tactics that landlords do. They create payment plans for tenants, which are all, I think, wise tactics, because the best thing you can do as a landlord is keep a tenant in and keep them paying, right? So if there's some things you can do to help, I think that's worth doing. But this is usually a last resort, right? It's usually a last resort, and it's definitely not foreign to other industries.
Before we get to talking about credit scores and like why they're useful, why do you think articles like this work? Like, and why do you think a publication like the Wall Street Journal, which is, This wouldn't be surprising if you see it on the Huffington Post or something. They write
Yeah.
that article, but the Wall Street Journal posting something like this is, I mean, it was shocking when this got shared in our company comms. So why is this happening? Why did the Wall Street Journal in their calculation think this is a good thing to publish?
Yeah, it's hard to speak to the Wall Street Journal specifically. I think that the reason a lot of articles use landlords as punching bags is because there is a negative reputation around landlords in general, right? Housing is a super sensitive issue in that you do have this situation where individuals, they feel like they're at their mercy as a renter, right, to their housing provider. So whether that is a individual landlord or whether that's one of the large owner operators, right, that own over 50% of the rental market here in the United States, that imbalance is often portrayed as a oppressive versus oppressor situation, and so landlords take the brunt of that, which is so funny to me when much of the regulation there and more than 50% of all the rentals in the U.S. are actually owned by these large owner operators, and they tend to just completely skate by, which I don't understand. Even the tactics mentioned in here, independent landlords are actually way less likely to pursue these tactics because they don't have their own lawyers.
Exactly.
Right? They don't have their own team designed for debt collection and to go after individual tenants. They're much more likely to do a cash for keys. They're much more likely to hear the human story of a tenant and make some concessions even on terminating a lease early. Right? Where the large owner operators, there's no flexibility. Right? You get what you get, right? Your lease is your contract and you're stuck with it. And so I do think that landlords have become a bit of a punching bag when talking about housing wildly unfairly, especially when you think about the number of landlords that are actually within the United States. You know, one thing I always like to think about is if you're in line at a Starbucks to get coffee, there's a pretty good chance if there's more than 10 people in that line, there's a landlord standing next to you, right? There's many more landlords than most people understand in the United States. And they come from a lot more diverse backgrounds than the Wall Street Journal would have you think.
Yeah, there's just no representation of the do-it-yourself independent landlord in it at all.
Yeah, they also fail to mention that through products like TurboTenant, throw out a plug, right?
Yeah.
There's opportunities for tenants to report their rent payments to actually enhance their credit, right? One of the big mistakes, or I would say missed opportunities within the broader rental market for a number of years is that rent payments didn't actually get reported to credit bureaus, right? The positive ones, the good ones. In most people's lives, it is the largest recurring payment they have, right? And so it makes sense that should actually build your credit worthiness, not just tear it down. And so that side of the story is completely missed. And it's incredible how many landlords we get to interact with that actually view that benefit to the tenant, while it doesn't do anything for them, specifically that benefit of the tenant to be super important. And it's the reason they actually pick platforms like a TurboTenant to facilitate the rent payments. So that is an option for their tenants.
The whole system is built so that we can lend money out effectively.
Yes.
So that banks can lend money out effectively. If you start breaking that system and making that signal less worthwhile for banks, what's going to happen is they're going to lend less.
Yes.
Overall, right?
Yeah.
And what is today a low credit score might mean we can't lend anything to you. And then, a low credit score might start creeping into the 650s, right? Because they just are going to be less comfortable sharing. If somebody does not pay, 1/6 of the rent that the lease they signed said they're going to pay over the next year, and the next person doesn't know that, well, now that you've weakened the signal for the credit score to be sending, and we're going to have less money in the economy.
One of the things when I see these headlines, right, I always think about what is the headline I'd love to see actually in the Wall Street Journal. So let's kick a couple around. What's a headline you'd love to see maybe around this topic in the Wall Street Journal that is not using landlords as a punching bag and is maybe explaining the reality of what's happening with boots on the ground?
Having been a renter before and now an owner, I have an experience of rent as something I paid on time.
Yeah.
And therefore, wrongly, I assumed that happened a lot. So it'd be terrific to see how many renters pay on time last month.
Yeah.
Just see that number, because it can be shocking, especially to good renters out there, just how many delinquent renters there are when you're applying to your next place. Why is the landlord doing all this? Well, 20% plus rent payments are late. And like, whoa, that's 1 out of 5 renters. And things like that, I think I'd throw that one out as one I'd love to see in the Wall Street Journal to kind of reorient us towards reality in the rental market. How about you?
Yeah, I'd love to see an article about the move of specifically independent landlords to using technology that allows renters to boost their credit score by reporting those rent payments, right? And a movement to actually improve credit scores, right? The inverse of what's being represented here, because the adoption of those services is still low, but is growing rapidly in the United States, and something that absolutely needs to be encouraged.
Absolutely. It's a very, very good thing. I mean, I how many times have you like met somebody who said, oh, I didn't buy a credit card until I was 25?
Yes.
And like, that is the thing you actually need to signal to start your credit score.
Yeah.
But you've been paying rent for what, 7 years probably at that point?
Exactly.
Like, it needs to have a significant uptick. Like, it should be encouraged, that upward movement.
And most people don't appreciate that a credit score doesn't start at the very top and then just get worse.
Yeah.
It actually starts and you have to build it, right? It is actually a building process. And so like you said, if you missed out on 7 years of rent that you've paid, those are really valuable inputs that should absolutely be on your credit score. And so I would love to see the Wall Street Journal speak to that.
So socialize that stuff. I mean, make the tenant ask the landlord, right? Like, hey,
absolutely,
can you do this? Landlord will Google it. I guarantee you, if it's an independent landlord, they're going to Google that as soon as they get that text message, and figure out how to make it happen for you, because they care.
Yeah, and tell the consumers they do have the power.
Yeah.
Ask for it, demand it.
Yeah.
Right? Demand that I pay rent through a method that boosts my credit, right?
Absolutely.
That is
an expectation.
That is absolutely within their right, and is a way that the Wall Street Journal can still speak to the consumers they're attempting to enrage, I think, with this article today.
Yes, exactly. And, make them less of a victim and more of an agent in their life.